My brother didn't come to my wedding because he had tickets to a NASCAR race in Talladega. I need you to sit with that. My brother, the person who grew up in the same house as me, who I taught to ride a bike, who I taught to ride a bike wing, who I drove to the emergency room at 2 in the morning. When he broke his wrist in 10th grade, skipped my wedding for a 3-day racing event he'd bought tickets to, after I'd already given him my date, and my parents told me I was being selfish for not understanding. My name is irrelevant. What matters is this. I am 31 years old. I have been with my husband, Elliot, for 6 years, and we got married last October at a vineyard outside Charlottesville, Virginia, on the most beautiful Saturday afternoon I have ever seen in my life. The leaves were turning. The light was gold. 212 people were there. My brother and my parents were not. Let me back up, because the way it started was so quiet, I almost missed it. Elliot proposed in March, 2.5 years before the wedding. We were in no rush. We wanted to save money, find the right venue, do it right. We got engaged, we told our families. Everyone cried and hugged, and my mom said she'd been waiting for this since the first time she met Elliot, and he helped her carry grocery bags in from the car without being asked. We booked the vineyard 14 months before the wedding, October 12th, a Saturday. The deposit was non-refundable after 30 days, so once we signed, that was the date. We told both families immediately. My parents wrote it on their refrigerator calendar in red marker. I saw it with my own eyes. My brother, who was 26 at the time, said, "That's so far away. That's, like, over a year." I said, "Yeah, that's kind of the point. Gives everyone time to plan." He nodded and went back to watching football. For the next 8 months, everything was fine. We planned the wedding the way you plan a wedding. Exhausting, expensive, wonderful in a stressful way. I found my dress in April. We finalized the menu in June. Elliot's parents flew in from Portland for a weekend to do venue walkthroughs. And his mom cried 3 separate times, and I loved her for it. My brother texted me in July to say he'd gotten tickets to the Talladega Superspeedway fall race weekend. He was excited. He'd gone the year before and loved it. He and 2 of his friends were making it a whole trip. Driving down, camping, the full experience. The race weekend was October 11th through 13th. My wedding was October 12th. I called him immediately. I said, "Did you look at the calendar before you bought those?" He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "I mean, it's Talladega. These tickets sell out." "My wedding doesn't sell out," I said. "There's one. It's on the 12th. You've known that for 8 months." He said he thought maybe we could work something out. Maybe I could do the ceremony on the 11th and the reception the 12th, or maybe they could just come to the reception and skip the ceremony. I stopped him there. "I am not restructuring my wedding around your race tickets," I said. "Please call the seller and see if you can get a refund or resell them. It's still 3 months out." He said he'd think about it. He didn't think about it. Or he thought about it and decided differently. 2 weeks later, my mother called me. I could tell from her tone immediately that particular careful, rehearsed quality her voice gets. When she's about to say something, she knows I won't want to hear but has convinced herself is reasonable. She said, "My brother was really torn up about this situation." I said, "What situation?" "He bought tickets to a race on my wedding day." She said, "Well, he bought them before he remembered your date. He's known the date for 8 months. Mom. Honey. He's 26. Boys that age aren't keeping wedding dates in their heads." I took a breath. I said, "Is there something you needed? Or are you calling to explain his decision to me? She said she was calling because she and my dad had been talking. And they thought, and she wanted me to really hear this with an open mind. They thought, maybe we should consider pushing the wedding to a different weekend, just by a few weeks. The vineyard might be flexible. We hadn't sent formal invitations yet. It wouldn't be that disruptive. I said, the invitations go out in 3 weeks. The photographer is booked. The caterer is booked. The florist is booked. The officiant is booked. Our out-of-town guests have flights, she said. I'm sure most of them would understand. Mom, I had to stop and just hold the phone for a second. Are you actually asking me to change my wedding date so that my brother can go to a car races? She said that, when I put it that way, it sounded harsh, but family was family, and she just didn't want there to be any regrets. I said, I agree. I don't want him to have any regrets either. That's why I'm asking him to sell the tickets. The call ended. Not in a fight exactly. Just in that tight, overly polite way, where both people know the conversation isn't over, but neither one wants to be the one to escalate it right now. I told Elliot that night. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands around a mug of coffee and just listened to the whole thing. When I finished, he said, What do you want, guest? What do you want to do? I want to get married on October 12th, I said. Then that's what we're doing, he said. That was the last time it felt simple. My dad called the following Sunday. My dad is not a phone person. He calls for birthdays, for emergencies, and apparently for this. He said he'd been thinking about the situation, and he wanted me to understand that my brother had been planning this trip for a long time, and it meant a lot to him, and that sometimes, in a family, you have to make compromises. I said, I've compromised. Nothing, Dad. I set a date 14 months in advance and I'm keeping it. He said, I understand you're upset. I'm not upset. I'm confused. Why is the compromise always mine to make? He didn't answer that directly. He said he hoped I'd think about it more. I said I'd thought about it enough. Over the next 6 weeks, there were more calls, more versions of the same conversation, the. My mother mentioned that the vineyard might offer partial credit if we had to reschedule. She'd looked into it. I didn't ask her to. The fact that she had looked into it, on my behalf, without my permission, made my stomach drop in a way I couldn't quite articulate. Then I found out she'd actually called the vineyard. Not to get information. To ask whether they would be willing to release us from our contract. Pursue the Virginia Supreme Court. The venue coordinator, a woman named, well, I'll just say she was extraordinarily professional, emailed me a few days later to confirm that my date was still reserved and to mention that my mother had reached out with some questions about our booking. She wanted to make sure everything was still on track from our end. I read that email 3 times. Then I forwarded it to Elliot. He read it. He set his phone down. He said, very quietly, she called them. She called them, I said. We didn't say anything else for a while. There's a particular kind of hurt that doesn't come out loud. It just sits somewhere under your ribs and makes it hard to breathe normally. I called my mother the next morning. I didn't yell. I've never been a yeller. I get too cold when I'm that angry, too precise. I said, I got an email from the vineyard. They said you contacted them about our contract. She started to explain. She was just asking questions. She was just trying to see what options might exist. You went around me, I said. On my wedding. You called my vendor without my knowledge to ask them about releasing a contract I signed. She said she was trying to help. I said, if you do anything like that again, contact any vendor, any guest, anyone involved in our wedding. without my explicit permission. I will not speak to you until after the wedding. Do you understand me? She said. I was being dramatic. I said, I mean it. Invitations went out on schedule. In the RSVP section, we had a simple card with 2 boxes, accepts with pleasure and declines with regrets. I checked the mail every day like I used to check for college acceptance letters. My brother's RSVP came back. Declines with regrets. I held the card for a long time. He had written nothing personal on it. Just checked the box and mailed it back. My parents' card came 4 days later. Declines with regrets, both of them. I sat down at the kitchen table. Elliot was at work. The house was completely quiet. Outside, someone was mowing their lawn. Normal Thursday sounds. I sat there with these 2 RSVP cards in my hands, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not breaking, exactly, but moving. Like a joint sliding out of place. I called my best friend, Tamsin, who was my maid of honor. She answered in 2 rings because she always answers in 2 rings, and when I told her, she said nothing for a long moment and then said, Okay, what do you need from me right now? That's the thing about Tamsin. She never makes it about her reaction. I said I needed to not cry about it until after the wedding. She said she could work with that. Over the next 2 months, I told almost no one. Elliot's family knew. His parents, his sister. They were heartbroken on our behalf, in the way that people from healthy families are heartbroken when they see something like this. Because they genuinely can't comprehend it. His mom offered to call my parents. I said absolutely not. This was not something anyone was going to fix with a phone call. Elliot's uncle, a man named, I'll call him our efficient's neighbor actually, because he'd been around the venue planning enough to become one of our unofficial day of support people. Anyway, Elliot had a family friend who had known him since childhood, a man named Walter Briggs, who had this quiet steadiness about him that I'd always admired from a distance. He pulled Elliot aside about 3 weeks before the wedding. I don't know exactly what was said. But Elliot came home that night and said, Walter, offered to be the one to walk you down if you want. No pressure, just if you want. I didn't think I wanted to, until I said yes. The week before the wedding, my mother called once more. I almost didn't answer. I did, because I am my mother's daughter, and some habits are hard to break. She said, she hoped I understood that this was hard for them too. I said, Mom, I have to go. There's a lot to do this week. She said, I just want you to know that if you change your mind about the date, even now, we would be there. I said, the wedding is in 6 days, guests have flights. The catering is finalized. The flowers are ordered. There is no changing anything. She said she understood. I said, do you? Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't feel like it. She didn't say anything. I said, I love you. I hope you change your mind. But I'm getting married on Saturday. She didn't come. October 12th was 61 degrees and cloudless. The leaves were at their absolute peak. Reds and oranges I didn't know Virginia could produce. The vineyard looked like something out of a painting. I stood in the bridal suite with Tamsin zipping my dress and 2 of my closest friends doing my hair and my soon-to-be sister-in-law, sitting cross-legged on the floor eating grapes from the snacks spread and kids said at breakfast. And Hurt said at breakfast, and I thought, I am happy. Right now, in this moment, I am genuinely happy. Walter walked me down the aisle. When I came through the doors and the music started, and I saw 212 people stand up, I looked straight ahead at Elliot. He was standing at the altar with his hands clasped and his jaw set in that way he has when he's trying very hard not to cry. And when our eyes met, he lost that battle completely. I didn't cry until he did. The ceremony was everything we planned. The vows were personal and took us weeks to write, and I will not share them here because they're ours. But I will say this. In the front 2 rows on my side, there were people I loved who had shown up for me. There were people who had flown in from Arizona and Colorado. And one friend who'd driven up from Savannah, Georgia at 6 in the morning because she didn't want to miss it. There were aunts and cousins in Tamsin who cried through all of it and kept apologizing for crying. There were 2 empty seats in the row directly behind them. I saw them once when I turned to hand my bouquet to Tamsin. 2 seats, 2 little reserved signs that I'd had made because I genuinely believed, until about 2 weeks out, that they might still change their minds. I looked at them for exactly 1 second. Then I looked back at Elliot. At the reception, after dinner, after toasts, Elliot stood up. He tapped his glass and waited for the room to settle. And this is the part that I replay sometimes when I'm falling asleep. The room went quiet, the way rooms do, when they can sense that something real is about to happen. He said, "I want to say something that's not in my prepared remarks." He looked at me. He said, "I know that today wasn't everything you pictured when you were little. I know there are people missing who should be here, and I know you've been carrying that quietly for months because that's who you are. You carry things quietly so other people don't have to carry them." He paused. 212 people were completely silent. "I want you to know," he said, "that every single person in this room chose to be here. They moved schedules and bought flights and drove hours and took time off work because they wanted to watch you become my wife. That's not a consolation prize. That is love in its most actual form." He raised his glass. He said, "To my wife, and to everyone here who knows what showing up actually means." The room erupted. I heard Tamsin before I heard anyone else. I ugly cried. I'm not embarrassed about it. The next morning, Elliot and I drove to the airport for our honeymoon. 10 days in Portugal, Lisbon, and the Alentejo region, which was Elliot's idea and was perfect. And my phone had 17 unread messages, a few from guests, 1 from my father-in-law, 2 from cousins I hadn't talked to in years who'd apparently had a great time. Nothing from my parents. Nothing from my brother. We were gone for 10 days. When we got back, I had a voicemail from my mom. She'd called on day 6 of our trip, which I thought was interesting timing. She said she missed me, and she hoped the wedding had been beautiful, and that she loved me. She did not say she was sorry. I didn't call back. Here is where it gets complicated. And I want to be honest about this part, because I've seen the way these stories can get flattened into something too clean. The truth is messier. About 3 weeks after we got home, my aunt, my mom's sister, called me. She had been at the wedding. She'd sat in the 3rd row and cried and danced and hugged me 4 separate times. She said she wanted me to know that the situation with my parents had caused a significant rupture in the extended family, that my grandmother, my mom's mom, who was 83 and had also been at the wedding and had danced slowly, with Walter's help, had told my parents at Thanksgiving that what they did was inexcusable and that she was ashamed. I didn't know what to do with that. Gratitude and sadness at the same time. My aunt also told me that my brother had, in fact, gone to Talladega. He'd posted about it on Instagram. Photos of himself at the track, a beer in his hand, sunglasses on, smiling. October 12th. I looked at the timestamp on the photos. He had posted them at 3:47 p.m. Our ceremony had started at 4 p.m. I put my phone face down on the counter and didn't pick it up for the rest of the evening. Elliot found me in the kitchen later. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just stood next to me at the counter and we made dinner together and watched something stupid on TV, and he fell asleep before the second episode ended. And I sat there next to him in the quiet and thought about the timestamp, and thought about the timestamp, and thought about the two empty seats, and thought about my mom calling the vineyard. I made a decision that night. Not a dramatic one. Not announced, just made. I was not going to reach out first. In January, my dad texted me. He said he thought we should get together and talk. I said I was open to that when I felt ready, and that I'd reach out when I was. He said okay. In February, my brother texted me for the first time since sending the RSVP card. He said he hoped the wedding had been great and that he was sorry he missed it. I stared at that message for a long time. I typed back, I appreciated the RSVP card. He didn't respond. In March, Elliot and I found out I was pregnant. We were not trying. Exactly. And also, not trying, which is to say we were in that space where you don't prevent something you'd be happy about. I took the test on a Tuesday morning and sat on the bathroom floor and cried for a while and then walked out and showed Elliot. And he sat down on the floor next to me and we stayed there for a long time. We told Tamsin first, then Elliot's parents, who were on video call and made the kinds of sounds that only grandparents make. Then my aunt, who cried. I did not tell my parents, or my brother. In April, my mom called again. This time I answered. She said she had been doing a lot of thinking. She said she knew that what happened had hurt me. She said she was sorry that things had played out the way they did. I waited. She didn't say anything else. I said, Mom, I need more than that. She said, What do you mean? I said, I need you to say specifically what you're apologizing for, because I need to know that we're talking about the same thing. There was a long silence. She said, I'm sorry you felt like we didn't support you. I said, very carefully, that's not an apology, that's an explanation of my feelings. Those are different things. She said she didn't know what I wanted from her. I said, I want you to say that calling my venue was wrong, that asking me to change my wedding date for a NASCAR race was wrong, that sending a declines with regards to your own daughter's wedding was wrong. She started crying. She said she was trying. She said she didn't understand why I was making this so difficult. She said she missed me. I said, I miss you too. I genuinely do. But me missing you doesn't make what happened okay. Both of those things can be true. We didn't resolve anything that day. I hung up and sat in the backyard with a cup of tea. And the dog, our dog, a 3-year-old beagle, named something I won't put here because I don't need the internet knowing my dog's name. And I just sat there in the sun. In May, I started showing. In June, my aunt mentioned to my mom that I was pregnant. I had not asked her to do this. I had not asked her to keep it secret either, so I can't be too upset about it. I understand why she did it. My mom called me within the hour. She was crying before she even spoke. She said she couldn't believe it. She said she was going to be a grandmother. She said she was so happy for us. I said, I'm glad you're happy. She said, when can we see you? I said, I'm not ready for that yet. She said, I'm your mother. I said, I know. And I love you. And I'm not ready. My dad texted the same evening. He said, heard the news, congratulations, we love you. When you're ready, we're here. That was the most straightforward thing he'd said to me in over a year. My brother texted, congrats. Hope you're feeling okay. I said, thanks, we're excited. That was all. Here is what I have learned, at 31, about forgiveness and about families. Forgiveness is not a light switch. You don't flip it, and suddenly everything is the same as before. It's more like physical therapy. Slow and deliberate and sometimes painful, and you have to keep showing up for it, even when you don't feel like it. I am still in the early sessions. We have not seen my parents since before the wedding. We have a video call scheduled for next month. The first one. And Elliot will be there. And I have spent a lot of time thinking about what I need from that conversation. Not what I want to say to punish them. What I actually need for myself to move forward. I need them to say what they did was wrong. Not "I'm sorry you felt hurt." Not "we handled it imperfectly." I need actual words, specific ones. If they can do that, then we build from there. Slowly. My brother and I texted twice last month. Not about anything real. Just a meme he sent about something we both find funny from childhood, and I laughed at it and said so, and he said lol same. It was 22 words total. But it was something. The baby is due in October. I think about that sometimes. October. A year after the wedding, give or take. Another thing happening in October that my family might or might not show up for. Elliot said, when we figured out the due date, well, October is apparently our month. I laughed. It was the right thing to say. Walter sent us a card when he heard about the pregnancy. Handwritten, the old-fashioned kind, with a stamp and everything. It said, Elliot told me once that the measure of a person is who they become under pressure. You both passed that test. I'm proud to know you. I kept the card. It's in the drawer, next to the wedding photos. I don't know exactly how the story ends yet. That's the honest answer. I don't know if my parents and I rebuild something real, or if we build a careful, polite version of a relationship that mostly avoids the things that matter. I don't know if my brother ever says something more than "congrats, sis" and "lol, same." I don't know what October looks like. What I know is this. 212 people showed up on a Tuesday, Thursday, a Saturday in October when the leaves were gold and the air was 61 degrees. And someone who loved me walked me down the aisle. And my husband stood in front of everyone we care about and said exactly the right thing. And we danced until the vineyard staff politely told us the night was over. That happened. No one can unhape it. And whatever comes next, I am keeping that.